Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Power Parsha Pearls. Tonight, we're going to take a particular look at Pesach, and I'd like to consider the following. I remember Pesach, 1994, my first Pesach in the Mill Hill community. When I first introduced the idea of a communal Seder, everybody loved the idea, but nobody was quite sure about how it was going to be done. I mean, how are you going to do the practicalities, the logistics, and the catering, and whatever else besides? The food, the warming of the food, the timings. And so through a process of trial and error, Chani and I set about to make it happen. Chani took charge of the logistics, and I would run the actual Seder. But by way of demonstration of how tense those moments were, it was already 12:30 when we just finished singing Shir HaMalot, the psalm that precedes the Birchat HaMazon, the grace after meals for bread, or in this case, matzah. And Chani whispers into my ear, you can't say grace after meals yet. We didn't do the Afikoman. Now, how many of the guests assembled were also aware of that and just too polite to say anything? I don't know. Or maybe some were just excited at the prospect of shortening the service, not to mention the matzah ordeal. But that notwithstanding, nothing could have been more excusable than what happened after that. I looked at the clock. It's nearly 1 a.m. Everybody is shifting uneasily. We just finished the Hallel. We just completed the fourth cup of wine, and I bid everybody a good night. And several sat there in stony silence. There was a look of serious disappointment across the room. People were whispering, words were being muttered, and then it hit me. Chad Gadya. I mean, how could I? For some, it is the highlight of the whole Seder, of the whole Pesach evening. It's one thing to leave out the matzah, but to leave out the song about the baby goat that my father bought for 2 zuz, that's unforgivable. Even for the many who were already exhausted and desperate to make their own exodus from the communal Seder, time suddenly stood still as everyone joined in the chorus of singing that time hallowed song. So let's look at that for a minute. Who is this baby goat, this kid? Who is the father? What are these 2 zuz, this currency? Explain our commentators, the kid, the baby goat, is symbolic of the Jewish nation. The father is our Father in heaven. The 2 zuz represents the 2 tablets with which God acquired us, as it were, at Sinai and marked the culmination of our exodus and our birth into nationhood. And to that end, therefore, the song, observe many of the great sages, is not a mere Dr. Seuss nursery rhyme. It's a song of great significance. It's a song of deep meaning. It's a song that has been preserved for centuries. And in so many ways, all the different attacks alluded to in the song tells the story of Jewish struggle, of Jewish endurance, and of Jewish perseverance. But I'd like to make one unusual observation in regard to this song. There's a baby goat minding its own business. Along comes the cat, as the song goes, and attacks the kid, which you might say therefore makes the cat bad. That means the dog that bites the cat is effectively coming to the kid's defense, making the dog the good guy, which means the stick that hits the dog to get him off the cat and allowing the cat to do its damage is a bad guy. And we see this in our history, can we not? That then makes the fire which wards off the stick by burning it a good guy, and then the water that looks to extinguish the fire a bad guy, and thus the cow that drinks the water is then good, while the slaughterer who then slaughters the cow is bad, making, wait for it, the angel of death who takes the life of the slaughterer a good guy. And that then, friends, means that God who terminates the angel of death is on the wrong side of the law. How do we explain this? If you follow this sequence of events in the story, you're left with God seemingly doing a wholly unjust act. Well, there are 2 basic explanations to this. One is simply this. The order just mentioned is based on the premise that the dog is good for coming after the cat. But is he? The kid is, as we said, the Jewish people. The cat attacks. That's between the kid and the cat. You dog, who asked you to interfere? Think Israel and its enemies. The enemy attacks the kid. The kid will figure it out. No one asked the dog, be it the United Nations, be it the EU, be it the ICC, or whichever other anti-Israel, anti-Semitic body to get involved. The dog is far from innocent, and so the order reverses, and God is definitively on the right side of justice. That's one way of looking at it. It's an interesting spin. But then there's another way to look at it, an altogether different perspective. Let's reconsider the question. After all the bitter herbs and the matzah and the lows and the highs, we look to emerge from the Seder experience with a regal bearing, deeply infused with a sense of pride and appreciation of who we are as one nation under God and what we represent as a light unto all other nations. We're filled with exuberance. We are morally uplifted as a result of the Passover experience. Even the rebellious son, alluded to within the four sons, has buried some of his earlier antagonism, as we've taken him through the process and demonstrated to him how fortunate he or she is too, to belong to such a sacred heritage. And after all said and done, we end with a problem. If you follow the sequence of events, you're left with God seemingly doing a wholly unjust act. It's a compelling question. After all said and done, we end with a lingering doubt, calling into question God's divine justice. Notwithstanding whatever spin we put on it, is that not, after all, the story of our people? On Pesach, we're celebrating our intimate relationship with God. How he did for us, that which he did for no other. How he took us out from Egypt and he made us his people. How he punished our oppressors. We remember the miraculous revelations at Sinai that serve as God's eternal covenant with us. And at the Seder, we feel safe and we feel protected and we feel mollycoddled and we feel ourselves in God's divine embrace. On the very night of Seder, the world just seems, for however many hours, just right, just and peaceful. The whole Haggadah is structured around questions and answers. The child asks, and we endeavor to provide. And yet, after all said and done, when we walk away from that Seder table and we wake up the next morning, is the world a safe place? Are we truly at peace? Are all our questions answered? When we walk from our Seder table and we peer out into the world, isn't there still suffering? Isn't there still illness? Are Jews, even little ones, just trying to go to school, not still losing their lives for no reason other than because? We're left with compelling questions. Maybe that's why, no matter the hour, Jews are always drawn to this song, and why it's sung with such fervor, because it reflects our reality in that after the Seder, after we celebrate our liberation from Egypt and our birth as a nation, there is but one big question that still remains. Why so much pain? Why so much agony, so much suffering, so many challenges? Why? Dear God, when I look at the sequence of events from the moment you bought the kid for 2 zuz, I am left but wondering, where is the justice in life? And yet, it is indeed precisely for this reason that we finish the Seder with this question, not just as a reality check, reflecting how life still seems so unfair. Rather, because at the end of Chad Gadya, we're not left with answers, rather questions. And that is the true secret of Jewish survival, of Jewish belief, of the Jewish story. The great 19th century European sage, Rabbi Moshe Sofer, was once asked by his very own son a very deep and complex question that went to the very core of the foundations of Jewish belief. And his father did not answer him. He who had authored volumes of responsa on every possible issue remained silent in the face of his son's questions. And only after a few agonizing days later, did he call his son back, and at length he patiently and lucidly clarified the matter, leaving no stone unturned and putting his son's mind at ease. And the son then looked to his father, and he asked him, rather perplexed, I have no doubt you had this answer available to you when I asked the question, why did you wait those several days before giving me the answer that I sought, allowing me to struggle with doubts and cynicism? And his father answered, son, I want you to teach you something even more important than the answer to your questions. I wanted to teach you that sometimes a Jew can live with a question. Daily we recite the verse from Chronicles in our prayer. And you shall know today, and you shall turn to your heart. Knowledge and heart represent both the intellectual and emotional dynamics of our faith. There is that which we can grasp with our minds, and there is that which is beyond human comprehension, which we know and we sense intuitively, even if we can't explain it. Your ear cannot absorb a piece of art, just as your eye cannot appreciate a symphony. So too, your mind has its limitations and will not be able to grasp that which is beyond its comprehension, that which transcends it. The Jew who insists on perceiving God on his or her terms is the one who typically becomes the rebellious son. To say, what I don't understand obviously makes no sense and must be wrong is presumptuous arrogance. It's like a 2-year-old saying, if I don't get Einstein's theory of relativity, then it must be wrong. No truer words was said than the ancient Yiddish idiom, nicht alles darf man verstehen. Not everything was given to understand. The eye allows us to experience sight. The ear allows us to experience sound. The nose to experience smell, and the mind to absorb logic. God is not perceived in the mind. He is intuited on the level of the soul. And that's the reality. That's the story of the Jewish people. Even as there are questions which remain unanswered, somehow we still persevere. The Chad Gadya ending with a question reflects the reality of the Jew. We didn't survive all these years and all these persecutions because of our minds, because we're clever. Nor did we survive because of our hearts, because of our courage and bravery. We survived because of our souls, because of our faith, because of our conviction. Faith is the soul's way of seeing. It originates not in the mind, not in the rationale, but in the soul, in the very fiber of our identity. Faith is something which questions do not weaken and answers do not strengthen. Chad Gadya, the kid that my father bought for 2 zuz, says, even as we end the Seder and go back to the struggles of life, we do not despair. There's a verse in Psalms where we address God and we say, or King David said, Lahagid baboker chastecha ve'emunotcha baleilas. We talk about, in the morning, we talk about your kindness and we discuss your faith at night. What does that mean? In the morning, in other words, when things are good, life is bright, then we talk about God's kindness. We appreciate his divine benevolence. But when it's night, when difficult things happen and there are challenges, then we talk about faith. We have to resort to faith. But here's the question, and it is a question I heard asked at a very tragic funeral I attended earlier this week in Israel. What it should read is not to discuss your kindness by day and your faith at night. It should say we discuss your kindness, dear God, by day and our faith at night. What do we mean when we say your faith, God's faith? What does that mean? And the answer given was because when it's night, when darkness descends, God is still every bit there holding our hands. It's his faith, meaning he has faith in us. Even when things happen, however inexplicably, he believes in us. And he believes in our ability to be able to rise to the challenge. And he knows, just as we must know, that if he got us to it, we can get through it and he will help get us through it. So Chad Gadya, we end with a compelling question about divine justice. Sometimes we cannot understand, yet we remain Chad Gadya, God's one kid goat, which he irrevocably acquired for 2 zuz at Sinai. Notwithstanding all the questions, notwithstanding all the challenges, we remain steadfast in our relationship with God, with the God of Israel, the land of Israel, and the people of Israel. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom and a happy and kosher Pesach.